Have you ever looked at yourself and felt like something essential was missing? Not because life got harder, but because somewhere along the way, you started living according to someone else's rules? This is the silent collapse of masculine identity that Carl Jung warned us about. Not through chaos or obvious destruction, but through subtle erosion. One compromise at a time. One quiet surrender after another. Until you're no longer acting from your own center. You're reacting to someone else's expectations. Many modern men find themselves trapped in emotional dynamics they don't fully understand. On the surface, the relationship seems peaceful. She's not screaming. She's not leaving. But deep down, you feel like you're walking on eggshells. You feel the pressure to constantly adjust, to please, to anticipate what will keep her calm, even at the cost of your own truth. And somehow you've begun to believe that this is love, that losing yourself for the sake of harmony is noble. It isn't. Jung believed that repression, especially of the masculine principle, doesn't lead to peace. It leads to quiet suffering, and this suffering doesn't always come with scars. Sometimes it comes with smiles, with soft manipulation, with the illusion of safety that slowly kills your vitality. You're not allowed to express anger. You're not allowed to have edges. You must be soft, agreeable, and emotionally available at all times. Not because it brings connection, but because it keeps the peace. What you don't see is that this dynamic is a trap. It's a psychological cage, one that you willingly step into, believing you're choosing love. In reality, you're being domesticated. The man you were born to be is quietly silenced, reshaped, and neutralized. You become a version of yourself that she can manage, and you don't even notice the cost until you're a shadow of who you used to be. This video is not about blaming women. It's about revealing a pattern, one that society rarely talks about because it's uncomfortable, especially when it's dressed in beauty and affection. But the truth must be spoken. There are women who do not want a partner. They want control. And the more compliant you become, the more power they gain. Jung would call this the shadow of the anima, the dark feminine, not in her empowered form, but in her manipulative, unconscious state. So this isn't just a video. It's a wake-up call. If you've ever felt that quiet guilt, that chronic confusion, that sense that no matter what you do, you're never enough, you need to understand what's actually happening. Because if you don't, you'll continue to lose pieces of yourself, one small silence at a time. And by the time you finally realize it, there may be nothing left of the man you were meant to be. Before it gets to that point, listen closely. Understand the game that's being played. Not because you hate women, but because you love yourself enough to stop being played. Carl Jung gave us the tools to see behind the mask. Now it's your job to use them. This is the beginning of taking your power back. 1. When love feels like a cage, it doesn't start with chains. It starts with tenderness, with admiration, with the intoxicating sense that you've finally found someone who sees you, appreciates you, and makes you feel wanted in a world that's increasingly cold and disconnected. But soon, that warm gaze becomes surveillance. That curiosity becomes expectation, and that freedom you once felt begins to shrink, subtly, almost imperceptibly. This is how the most dangerous cages are built, not from iron, but from affection. Carl Jung understood that the psyche is drawn not just to what is pleasurable, but to what is familiar. And if your inner child once learned that love was conditional, that peace had to be earned, and that your truth had to be filtered for the comfort of others, then you will unconsciously gravitate toward relationships that make you feel trapped, and call it intimacy. She doesn't have to say it out loud, but you feel it. Her approval becomes the currency of the relationship. Her comfort becomes your primary job, and slowly you begin to abandon your instincts to keep her calm. You stop saying what you think. You soften your tone. You suppress your desires, not because she asked, but because she made you feel that your full self was too much. What makes this so insidious is that she may still smile. She may still say, "I love you." But deep down, you feel the tightening, the weight, the invisible leash. You begin to anticipate her reactions. You become a manager of her emotions, a curator of your truth, and a silent guardian of her comfort. And the tragedy is, you start believing this is what it means to be a good man. But Jung warned us about this pattern. He knew that the repression of one's authentic nature, especially in men, leads to psychic collapse. You cannot sacrifice your truth forever without paying the price in anger, resentment, anxiety, and depression. When your relationship becomes a prison disguised as romance, your soul begins to rot. You may not scream, you may not fight, but inside, you're dying. Because here's the truth. Love should never require the death of your essence. Real love challenges you, yes, but it also expands you. It makes space for your wildness, your darkness, your edge. It doesn't demand that you become less to be accepted. It invites you to become more and to be loved, even when that more is inconvenient. The woman who fears your truth will always try to tame you. And if you're not aware, you will call that taming connection. You'll think that you're being mature, when in fact you're being conditioned. You'll confuse your silence with strength, when it's really self-erasure. And eventually, you'll wake up and wonder why you feel invisible in your own life. That's when you have a choice. You can stay in the cage, because it's warm, because it's familiar, because she still smiles when you behave. Or you can break it, and not with cruelty, but with truth. You can risk her discomfort to reclaim your voice. You can let her see who you really are, even if it shatters her illusion. Because if she only loves the version of you that's safe, she doesn't love you. She loves control. Carl Jung didn't believe in conformity for peace. He believed in wholeness through confrontation, with your shadow, with your truth, with the forces that quietly bind you. And sometimes that confrontation begins in your own home, in your own relationship, in the mirror you once called love. You were not born to be caged. You were born to be conscious. 2. The mirror that distorts you. At first, she reflects everything you've been starving for. Attention, warmth, the sensation of being chosen. And because you've carried silent wounds for years, the mother who didn't see you, the ex who made you feel replaceable, the world that told you to be useful but never vulnerable, you give yourself to this reflection with hunger. But over time, the mirror begins to twist. It no longer reflects who you are, but who she needs you to be. You find yourself hesitating before speaking, filtering your honesty, dimming your opinions. Not because you want to lie, but because truth has consequences in her world. Because your authenticity feels like a risk you can't afford. You begin to mold yourself. You round out your edges. You become soft in the places where you were once bold, and you tell yourself it's growth. But it's not. It's survival. Jung would say, this is the moment you've lost contact with yourself. The anima, the feminine within, has been projected outward onto a woman who now holds your emotional center hostage. You're no longer seeing her. You're seeing your own psychological history, your unmet needs, your hopes, your ache for redemption, reflected back at you. And that's why it's so hard to walk away. Because you're not just leaving her. You're leaving the part of yourself that still believes she can save you. But she can't. And she won't. Because it was never her job. That's exactly why I created the SIM method, a simple 5-minute practice to help men reconnect with their truth, reclaim emotional clarity, and break free from codependent dynamics. You'll find the link in the pinned comment below. When the mirror starts distorting you, the answer is not to keep adjusting your posture to look better. The answer is to step away, to stop seeing yourself through her eyes, to remember that the man you were before her still exists, and he was already enough. You don't have to beg for peace. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to trade your soul for temporary affection. The woman who needs you to become small so she can feel big is not your partner. She's your captor. Break the mirror. Return to yourself. And remember, real love doesn't blur your reflection. It helps you see yourself more clearly. Third, her control is in what she doesn't say. Most men are trained to defend themselves against loud anger, not against silence, not against withdrawal, not against the quiet punishments that never scream, but still bleed you dry. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't argue. Instead, she goes still, cold, distant. And suddenly your entire nervous system is on trial, and you don't even know what you did. You ask what's wrong. Nothing, she says. But her energy shifts. The warmth vanishes. Her texts slow down. Her touch disappears. Her eyes don't meet yours anymore. And just like that, you begin to spiral, trying to fix something that was never spoken. Carl Jung warned us, the unconscious has its own language. It doesn't need words to dominate. It uses patterns, tension, guilt. The withdrawal of connection becomes a tool of power, not because she's evil, but because it works. And because many women were never taught to communicate needs, only to withhold affection until the man earns it back. This is the dark dynamic where feminine softness becomes a psychological cage. You're never directly blamed, but you're always responsible. You're not accused, but you're expected to feel guilty. You walk on eggshells not because she asked you to, but because the silence taught you better than words ever could. And slowly you start to doubt yourself. You scan your behavior like a detective. You replay conversations. You apologize for things you don't even understand, just to bring the warmth back. Just to escape the emotional winter she pulled over the relationship like a heavy blanket. But Jung would ask you, who are you when you're not busy trying to regulate her mood? If you don't have space to be imperfect, to speak clumsily, to breathe without being punished by her withdrawal, you're not in love. You're under surveillance. And your masculine essence, your need for truth, clarity, and directness, is being smothered under the weight of her unsaid expectations. This is where many men break, not from screaming, not from insults, but from the exhaustion of living in emotional fog, from being in a relationship where love must be earned through obedience, and peace is conditional on your ability to read minds. She doesn't ask for power. She simply leaves little moments of absence and lets you scramble to fill them. It's not love. It's programming. And until you see it, you will confuse stillness with depth and coldness with mystery. You'll think you're the problem, that you're too sensitive, too weak, too needy. But the truth is, your sensitivity is not the issue. It's the key. It's how you recognize that something is off. It's how you begin to wake up. It's how you finally realize that love without communication is not maturity. It's manipulation. You deserve connection that speaks, that names problems, that respects your time and energy enough to meet you in reality, not in silent expectation. Because what she doesn't say is often the very thing controlling you. 4. The illusion of empowerment masks a hunger for control. We live in a time where empowerment is celebrated, loudly, constantly, and often without question. And that's not inherently wrong. But Carl Jung warned that every light casts a shadow. And in the case of modern femininity, the shadow is this. What masquerades as empowerment is often a strategy for domination. Not over systems, but over men. Over you. She speaks of independence, yet expects your full emotional devotion. She claims she needs no one, but crumbles when you don't validate her constantly. She says she's strong, but the moment you say no, the narrative shifts. Suddenly, you're the oppressor, the narcissist, the emotionally unavailable villain. This isn't strength, it's a performance. It's a story where she's always the heroine, and you're always a step away from becoming the threat. Jung believed the most dangerous thing is not evil, it's unconsciousness. And many modern women unconsciously wield their pain, their beauty, their social scripts as weapons, not to build bridges, but to preserve control. Control of the narrative, control of the emotional temperature, control of how much you're allowed to express before it makes her uncomfortable. She speaks of emotional safety, yet shames you the moment your truth disrupts her ego. She preaches vulnerability, yet punishes you for being too raw. She says real men open up until you do, and then it's too much, too emotional, too intense, not man enough anymore. This isn't equality, it's emotional domination, coated in progressive language. You are expected to listen, to support, to elevate. But if you ever ask for reciprocity, you're labeled insecure, needy, weak. And that label doesn't just sting, it sticks. It shapes the dynamic. It makes you retreat, shrink, self-censor. And suddenly you're no longer showing up as a man. You're surviving her moods, avoiding her triggers, and becoming a puppet of peace. Jung would say, this is the danger of unintegrated power. When a person believes they are entitled to emotional superiority, they stop relating. They start controlling. And make no mistake, control can look like empowerment. It can speak in soft tones, wear beautiful clothes, and post quotes about self-love. But beneath it lies a deep fear. Fear of being challenged. Fear of not being adored. Fear of losing the upper hand in emotional transactions. So she hides that fear by flipping the script, by making you responsible for her happiness, by demanding that your strength look like submission, but dressed up as emotional intelligence. And here's the catch. If you comply, you lose yourself. If you resist, you're the villain. That's the trap. Jung taught that individuation, the path to wholeness, requires stepping outside of collective myths. And this is one of the most dangerous myths men face today, that your worth is measured by how well you walk on eggshells, that to be a good man, you must constantly tolerate emotional imbalance, just because it's wrapped in the language of empowerment. But you are not here to be a character in someone else's hero story. You are not here to play the silent supporter in a play where only one person gets to grow. You are here to be whole, to feel, to speak, to draw lines that protect your peace. And if her empowerment depends on your silence, your self-betrayal, and your emotional labor, it's not empowerment, it's exploitation. By now, you've probably seen the pattern. Not just in women you've met, but in yourself, in the ways you've silenced your truth to keep her comfortable, in how you've walked on emotional eggshells while calling it love, in the twisted logic that made you believe being a man meant enduring quietly, adjusting endlessly, and never confronting what didn't sit right in your soul. Carl Jung warned us, what you do not bring to consciousness will rule your life, and you will call it fate. How many men have mistaken manipulation for mystery? How many have romanticized chaos because it reminded them of their childhood pain? How many have lost their voice and called it maturity? The truth is brutal. Much of what's celebrated today as feminine empowerment is often a mask. A mask worn not just to protect the self, but to control the other. And if you're not awake, you'll applaud your own submission. You'll confuse being tolerated with being loved. You'll call guilt intimacy. You'll call distance mystique. You'll call control connection. But one day, something will break inside you. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. A moment of stillness when you realize you've betrayed yourself one time too many. You're no longer honest. You're no longer bold. You're no longer alive in your own skin. You've become the perfect man for her script, but a stranger to your own soul. And that moment, that's your rebirth. That's the moment Jung would call the beginning of individuation, when you choose to leave behind the roles, the projections, the guilt-driven compliance, and finally become real. Not angry, not reactive, not bitter, just clear. Clear about what you deserve. Clear about the games you'll never play again. Clear about the fact that real love does not ask you to disappear. So if any part of you feels seen by this message, let this be your turning point. Because the greatest tragedy isn't being controlled. It's waking up too late and realizing you let them do it.